Today, today is June 22nd, 1995. The survivor here is Simon Lewenberg, and my name is David Finkelstein. We are in Sunrise, Florida, in the United States of America, and this interview will be conducted in English. Please tell me your name.
Simon Lewenberg,
And when were you born?
July 15, 1923,
Where were you born?
in Lodz, Poland.
Okay. And your father's name?
Itzek Lewenberg,
And your mother's name?
Gela Lewenberg,
What was your mother's maiden name?
Reiter.
And did you have any brothers or sisters?
Yes, I did have two brothers.
Okay. And what were their names?
Morris was the oldest, and David was the middle brother.
Okay. And how about your grandparents? Who lived with you and your family? Your grandparents, your aunts, or anybody else?
Yes, my grandfather lived in the next building, but it was the same courtyard. He lived on the second floor of one of the buildings. And with my grandfather lived in the big early part that I can remember. There were three aunts of mine that lived with him. And one of them died in the early 30s of typhoid. And then there remained two aunts.
What was the names of your grandfather and your grandparents and the aunts?
Well, my grandfather, my grandmother died a long time ago before I was born. My grandfather's name was Menashe. My aunt's name was Sarah, one, and the younger one was Hannah. The one that passed away was Leah, and she had left a little boy that also stayed with my grandfather. That was my cousin. Then his father took custody of the little boy, and I didn't see him the later part when I stayed home in Poland.
Tell me, what was it like growing up in Lodz, Poland with your family?
Well, I come from a working class family. We weren't wealthy, or we weren't rich. We were, I could say, poor. It was a poor existence in Poland. My father was a weaver. He worked in a factory for 22 years up until the war. At times before the war, times were bad when my father didn't have work, a whole week's work. When he did have a whole week's work, we were able to exist decent. But when the work was cut for some reason or another, times were bad. But I didn't know any better. All the people around me had almost the same existence. They had the same living quarters. The people had a rough time making a living at that time in Poland. But my childhood in general was a happy one because I was with my family. And
What do you remember from those happy times?
happy times, I remember being with my family, being with my neighbors and friends, playing, being outdoors most of the time in the summer, also in the winter, because the apartment was very small and there was not much to do. So we used to play games outdoors, and as a kid, it was a happy time.
What was the city of Lodz like?
The city of Lodz was a industrial city. It was a textile industrial city. And if I recall, we were 750,000 people in Lodz. It was the second largest in Poland after Warsaw. I'm sorry, you asked me the question.
What was Lodz like?
Well, Lodz like. Well, it was a city with different sections as you have it here, and different boroughs. You had a section where rich people lived. You had a section where poor people lived. But it was an interesting city because there was always something to do for us kids. Although we didn't have television and radio and all the things that the children have here in the United States, but there was always something going on.
What were some of the things that you did during those days?
Most of the things we were interested is soccer. That was the national sport in Poland. So we used to organize a little club and play soccer with neighboring clubs that were in the city. But then there were also clubs on the national level, and they had games in large fields outside of the city.
Do you remember your address before the war?
Yes, I do.
What was it?
Mlynarska 8. It was a large building that it was a corner building. Mlynarska 8, it had three addresses actually. Mlynarska 8, around the corner was Pieprzowa in Polish, 22 and 24. But it was the same, it belonged to the same courtyard. Inside the courtyard there were two wooden buildings. And I lived up until the age of 10. We lived in one of the apartments in the wooden buildings. When I was 10, I remember my family moved to Pieprzowa 22, which it was the same courtyard but the next building. It was a brick building on the 3rd floor. And we had a little more space. Also, at Mlynarska 8, we didn't have electricity. Our light was from a kerosene lamp. But at Pieprzowa 22, we installed electricity.
Did you
So
have
it made life a little easier.
Did you have a lot of neighbors?
Oh, yes. We were about 136 tenants. And we had lots and lots of children. So there was always something going on.
Do you remember any of your neighbors?
Oh, yeah, I do remember them quite well, although the names, some of the neighbors that I was close with, I remember the names.
Who were the neighbors that you were close with?
There was the Chapnik family
Right.
that I used to be close. Their name I can remember because I almost was there daily. In fact, they had a daughter my age, and we were like, she was like my girlfriend, so to speak. So I was there quite often. We had two bakeries. One bakery was Mlynarska 8 on one side of that big building, and the other bakery was on the other side, the Pieprzova 22. We had one butcher, we had two groceries, we had a glazier. There was on the corner was a candy store. So it was a lot of activity in that with 136 tenants.
Are there any of your neighbors from the building that you're still in contact with today?
Well, it's very odd, or miraculous, I should say. I was born Mlynarska 8 in that small one-room apartment. Next door to me was a neighbor, the Bornsteins. They had a son who was 1 year older than me, Morris Bornstein. In the other corner on the same floor was a family, Kalb. They had amongst their children one son, Pinkus Kalb. He was 2 years older than me. Of course, I remember those neighbors still alive, those two neighbors' children, Morris Bornstein and Pinkus Kalb. In fact, Pinkus Kalb was with me in the concentration camp.
Which one?
In Auschwitz,
Okay.
which was a labor camp. And he survived it.
Which Auschwitz? Which Auschwitz?
Auschwitz, what they call Auschwitz II, really.
Okay.
Because Auschwitz I was the extermination camp where I first arrived at, and I was transported from there to that Auschwitz II, to the labor camp.
So you're telling me about your friend Pinkus, right?
Well, Pinkus was, as I said, 2 years older. He was my middle brother's age. At home, he wasn't my friend. I didn't associate with him. 2 years was a big difference in age at that time. But when the Germans invaded Poland and we lived in the ghetto, they established the ghetto for the Jews. In 1940, in December, the Germans put up announcements: whoever wants to go to work to Germany will receive food, housing, and money. Some money will be sent to their parents. Can I backtrack a little bit
Go ahead.
about the ghetto?
Yeah, tell me about the ghetto.
Well, the war broke out in 1939 in September. And soon afterwards there were talk that the Germans will create a ghetto for the Jews. And then they had announcements and told all the Jews, they picked out the poorest part of Lodz section, and they established a ghetto there. And they asked all the Jews that lived outside that area that they surrounded with barbed wire for the ghetto to move into the ghetto. I happened to live in the section where the ghetto was established, so we didn't have to move. They closed the ghetto in May of 1940. Before they closed the ghetto, a lot of people knew what was going to happen, that things were going to get bad. And a lot of people tried to accumulate as much food as they possibly could. Some succeeded and some didn't. I also made, with my friends, we made a sled out of wood, and we helped some people from outside, some Jews from outside the ghetto, move their belongings inside, and I earned myself a few dollars that way. That went on for some time until they closed the ghetto. In the ghetto, there were no supplies of food inside the ghetto. The food had to come from outside, and the Germans had asked the people of each building to have a committee, and then they had they established some food depots where they delivered the food inside the ghetto to the depot, and each building went there and picked up the food for the inhabitants of that building. So right away the food was rationed, and we started to go hungry every single day. And one day to the other we had to wait to get that ration of bread or a few potatoes, whatever. I can't exactly remember what they gave us. Meat, I know they didn't give us, that they didn't. So it was very, very hard. Me as a young boy, I wanted to eat, and there was no food available. In fact, the piece of bread that my parents picked up from the rations, we cut it in pieces, in 5 pieces, and weighed it, so each person got the same amount of bread. I remember that many times my mother cut a piece off her bread and gave it to my oldest brother.
Why?
I felt he was the oldest, and he was married. His wife wasn't with him. She was in a little town someplace in Poland with a child that they had, a little son. And she felt that he had a lot of pain not being with his wife and the child, and she wanted him to survive, I suppose. I'm assuming. I felt it. So she used to cut a pig and gave. At times she used to give me a piece also from her portion. But I remember most of the time she gave it to my oldest brother. But I have a guilt feeling about something that I never told anybody.
What?
When we used to get the portion of bread from my parents, each one hid their piece of bread in different places. Circumstances and hunger turns normal people into something that they normally wouldn't do. And I remember that I found my brother's piece of bread, and I cut off a small piece. This I never told anybody. That's the first. My wife or my children don't know that. But I've been living with this all my life, and I still feel guilty. And I have problems. How do I ask my brother to forgive me? He doesn't even know. So in December, the Germans put up signs, whoever wants to work, and I couldn't stay in the ghetto anymore. Hunger hurt very much, and I felt guilty for what I did. So I wanted to remedy that. If I go to work, the Germans will send money to my parents. In this way, I will help them. And by that, I will clear my conscience. Well, it's still with me all those years. Well, my neighbor Pinkus Kalb also volunteered, and I volunteered to go to work to Germany. They had on the marketplace, they had put up barracks where we had to report, and doctors examined us and saw if we are fit to go to work. And I was picked as a fit person to work. So my neighbor Pinkus Kalb and myself, we held together and we left together on that transport on December, I believe December 13, 1940.
Where were you living before you left?
Before I left, I lived in a lodge in the ghetto with my parents.
At Menashe 8? In Menashe 8?
Menashe 8, no, that was Piepshava 22. I had already moved, remember,
Okay.
when I was 10 years old.
Tell me
It's the same.
what you remember about leaving that apartment that you had been pretty
Well,
much grown up in.
I never was away from home, not for one night. So leaving was very hard for me, was very hard for my parents, but they couldn't hold me back. They believed I will get work and I will have food, and it was the best thing to do, otherwise I would starve to death there.
What'd they say to you?
They tried to tell me not to go, of course. They didn't want me to go, but I didn't want to listen. I said, I have to go. I can't live here anymore. This is an opportunity to get food. And work, I'm not afraid of work. So they finally said, okay. I remember the last day that I left, my mother took the ration of potatoes from everybody and made potato pancakes for me and let me eat the whole everything. When I left, my mother didn't come with me. My father took me and we went to the assembly station where to report. I remember holding my father's, I didn't hold his hand, I actually held his thumb. It was December, it was cold, but I felt the warmth of his hand, because many times as a kid, when my hands were cold, he had very warm hands. He used to take my hands in his and warm them up. And I remember walking with him to report to the assembling place. And that's the last time I saw my father. And I try at times to recapture that moment of the warmth of his hand in my mind, because that's the only thing, the feeling that it gives me a good feeling. And in fact, after the war, I was dreaming very much about my family and about the concentration camp, and the dreams never stop. In fact, I had a dream last night, I can't remember, but my wife told me this morning that I was crying in my sleep. So evidently, thinking about this interview made me dream, and I don't remember the dream. I used to remember dreams better before, now I do not. Well, we were talking about reporting to go to work to Germany, so I stayed with that neighbor, Pinkus Kalb, and I stayed at that barrack where they examined us maybe for a day or two. Then one late afternoon, they marched us out on the military guards with fixed bayonets, and the people from the ghetto saw, and obviously my parents must have been there watching us march out too. And I said to myself, what would they think seeing us being marched by military? They must be, we never thought that has anything with the military to do. But the German soldiers marched us out outside of the city near a railroad station, and the train hadn't come yet. Night was falling, it got dark. There were big mounds of snow, and all of a sudden they told us, run up, everybody run up the snow bank, that mound of snow, down, up and down for quite some time. And I couldn't imagine, why would they want to do this? Maybe they're going to shoot us. And we tried to stay together, Pinkus and I. Finally they stopped, the train came, and they loaded us onto the train.
Could we stop before they load you onto the train? We gotta change tapes. I want you to remember where you're at, and we'll pick up right where you left off on the next tape.
Okay.
Thank you.